Throughout the civilized world, the teachings of Marx evoke the utmost hostility and hatred of all bourgeois science, both official and liberal, which regards Marxism as a kind of pernicious sect, and no other attitude is to be expected, for there can be no impartial social science in a society based on class struggle. In one way or another, all official and liberal science defends wage slavery, whereas Marxism has declared relentless war on that slavery. To expect science to be impartial in a wage-slave society is as foolishly naive as to expect impartiality from manufacturers on the question of whether workers' wages ought not to be increased by decreasing the profits of capital. But this is not all. The history of philosophy and the history of social science show with perfect clarity that there is nothing resembling sectarianism in Marxism, in the sense of its being hidebound, petrified doctrine, a doctrine which arose away from the high road of the development of world civilization. On the contrary, the genius of Marx consists precisely in his having furnished answers to questions already raised by the foremost minds of mankind. His doctrine emerged as the direct and immediate continuation of the teachings of the greatest representatives of philosophy, political economy, and socialism. The Marxist doctrine is omnipotent because it is true. It is comprehensive and harmonious, and provides men with an integral world outlook irreconcilable with any form of superstition, reaction, or defense of bourgeois oppression. It is the legitimate successor to the best that man produced in the 19th century, as represented by German philosophy, English political economy, and French socialism. Vladimir Lenin, the three sources and three component parts of Marxism.
Welcome to Prolewiki.
Hello, and welcome to Prolewiki, your bi-weekly dose of history, politics, and culture without the liberalism. You can find and follow us on most social media platforms at Prolewiki and on TikTok at proles.pod. If you want to help us reach more people, leaving 5-star reviews on any of the various podcast catchers is the best way to do that. If you want to help us with our vision, you can subscribe to our Patreon over at patreon.com/Prolewiki. There's a lot of great stuff there, such as early access to main feed episodes, bonus episodes, theory beats, study guides, raffles, surprise drops, and more, with more on the way. This episode is brought to you by friend of the podcast, Francis Fukuyama. Today, we're going to be discussing a handful of theory texts and giving you some strategies for understanding, reading, and retaining the knowledge you'll be gathering via that reading. But first, who do we have with us today?
Hi, it's me, Rae.
And our special guest is Andre, who joined us for the Foundations for Aspiring Marxists, or perhaps Marxist-Leninist. And,
Inshallah. Sorry, guys, I'm back. The annoying person you hated returned.
Well, it hasn't been released yet, so we don't know whether people hate you yet. But I am your host, Jeremy. And Andre, where would you like to begin?
Well, once again, I'm Andre. I'm a contributor to the channel Weeb Revolution. A while back, I made a resource guide video for aspiring Marxist-Leninists, and the hosts of Prolewiki were kind enough to let me flesh out some of my ideas in that video here on their lovely podcast. If you haven't listened to our previous episode, which Jeremy said is called A Foundation for Aspiring Marxists, I recommend you do that first if possible, partly because there are some great books we talked about in that episode, but also because we set some base level ideas there where we'll expand further upon here. This episode, like the last one, is targeting beginners, but if you're an intermediate or long-time learner of Marxist theory, there may be stuff here for you too. Again, this episode is not a primer or the end-all be-all of anything. We will recommend some primers. We'll point to reading lists various groups and orgs have put together. We'll suggest some auxiliary texts that I think are worth your time. And of course, we'll round things out by talking about studying habits. I said this 1,000 times last episode, and I'll say it 1,000 times here, but check out the show notes. Every text we'll be talking about will be listed below, and we'll directly link as many of them as possible.
Nice.
All right. Theory. How and where to begin? So before we even get to Marx, Engels, Lenin, or Stalin, I would like to talk about 3 texts that were specifically written to be introductions. These 3 texts are Elementary Principles of Philosophy by Georges Politzer, Dialectical Materialism, an Introduction, which is 3 volumes, written by Maurice Cornforth, and Basic Curriculum of the Principles of Marxism-Leninism, translated by Luna Nyugun. First, Elementary Principles of Philosophy. So the author, Georges Politzer, was born in Hungary in 1903, and by age 17 he was already an active militant communist. Due to the extremely repressive right-wing regime that took power in Hungary in 1920, he had to flee the country and eventually settled in France, where he became a professor who literally taught dialectical materialism. Because of his underground communist work during the Nazi occupation of France, he was arrested and executed by the Gestapo in 1942. But his students used his notes and previous lectures to compile this amazing book posthumously. I just felt it was important to mention who Politzer was so we can be grateful that we have his amazing notes to teach aspiring communists even now. Much love to this guy. As for the book itself, you'll find it to be a pretty approachable entry point to concepts like idealism, metaphysics, and materialism. You get a beginning glance at the study of dialectics, an intro to historical materialism, and how we should think about ideology. And it's stellar. My 2 other comrades who read this book call it one of the best introductions to Marxist philosophy, and I'm inclined to agree. I've also tested it out with a few reading groups, and a lot of people are really fond of it, so don't worry, this one has been tested and mostly stands up to rigor. It's not too long, so it is really good for a book club, even.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as with everything else we'll talk about, this is not an endpoint of your studying. Don't finish this book and call yourself an expert. In fact, if you finish the book and start feeling a little too confident, go back and answer the study questions that are included at the end of each chapter. Please don't throw the questions into DeepSync or ChatGPT. Answer them yourselves, please. Last point on the book. Since he was a professor in France, this book was originally published in French. So there are different translations and republished versions of the book available. The 2 options provided in the show notes link to an upload of the book on Prolewiki, and another link that links to the foreign language press version. Both are freely available, so if you start reading one and don't quite vibe with the way it's written, maybe try out the other version. It might be just a translation thing. You can also purchase a physical copy from foreign language press if you would rather not read the PDF. Just some options. Next up, we have Dialectical Materialism, an Introduction, volumes 1 to 3 by Maurice Cornforth, republished by India-based publisher Aakar Books. You can find these different volumes from Cornforth online all over the place, sometimes individually, sometimes 2 together, sometimes all 3, but they usually don't have the most up-to-date revisions. In the episode notes, you'll find a digitization of the Aakar Books compilation, the one I'm talking about, that I put together using my cell phone, an image to PDF app, and some help from one of my Prolewiki comrades. It's not perfect. You can unfortunately see my highlighting in the first volume because I didn't know that I would end up digitizing this book over the course of a week. But you can't find this book online, so I had to give it to you all however way I could.
Yeah.
So this book I'm particularly fond of, even though it is a pretty hefty book. The author does a good job of conveying foundational Marxist concepts. His writing style isn't as concise as Politzer. You can see that if you compare the lengths. But Cornforth writes in a way that organically builds off of each section in each chapter. He does a really good job in Volume 1 in conveying how the laws of contradictions work. And that one I found particularly helpful. This was a really helpful book for getting me to understand contradictions.
Yeah, it's one of those concepts that's a little bit difficult, especially when you say something like as actually Frank said on the recording yesterday, that all systems and all ideologies have contradictions. And explaining that to somebody who's like, okay, well, does that mean that like socialism has like problems within it? Well, yeah. There are problems within every system, and we need
Which
to
again,
address
as I
those
said,
as
in the
much as we
Stalin
can.
era, 100 years ago, is the argument for communism. It's
Yes.
not the argument for not trying. It is
Correct.
the argument for communism. The fact
Right.
that socialism does not go far enough is the argument for communism.
And when
Yeah.
we get to communism, we will discover contradictions
New
in that system
contradictions,
as
and
well.
we should. It just won't be class-based.
Correct.
Yep,
Yeah.
Yep. And that's something Volume 1 does really well. He really hammers in the point of finding those contradictions, resolving them, and driving development forward. He does a really good job. I'm not doing the book justice by just talking about it. In Volume 3, he does a stellar job of explaining truth and knowledge from a Marxist perspective. Volume 2, which is on historical materialism, is also pretty good. But out of the 3 volumes, it is my least favorite. Specific criticism is the way he includes Nikita Khrushchev, his state of the whole people idea, which, from history, led to complacency in the CPSU that allowed counter-revolution to eventually occur. That part doesn't negate the good parts of Volume 2, but I did want to draw attention to it because that's a criticism I have.
Sure.
Also, the book is from 1960s, written by a British guy, so some of the way he talks about like indigenous people is a bit It's not malicious, but it's
Yeah.
He also has this weird, like this strong suspicion of psychoanalysis and the idea of the subconscious that I feel like is more of a relic of its time. Last thing is Cornforth's volumes. Each of them ends with a reading list of the classic authors. So if you finish one of the volumes and you think, man, maybe I should try to read Marx or Engels, well, you're in luck because he has specific recommendations. I have umbrage with the fact that even though he quotes Mao's essay on practice several times in Volume 3, he doesn't include on practice in the reading list at the end of the volume. Don't know what's up with that. He does recommend on contradiction at the end of Volume 1. I just thought that was a little silly. That's a minor gripe. I just criticize Cornforth because I love the effort he put into these books, and they taught me a lot. I obviously wouldn't have spent all that time digitizing this giant thing if I didn't think it was worth reading.
Sure.
As I said, a link to the PDF will be in the show notes. It's hosted on Prolewiki. All you have to do is download the file and read it using whatever app you think is best. And you can also buy a physical copy from Aakar. They are Indian-based, so I don't know how the currency conversion will work depending on where you live, and it may take some time to ship, but that's also an option too. So for our third primer, there is the Curriculum of the Basic Principles of Marxism-Leninism, Parts 1 and 2, translated by Luna Nguyen, known on YouTube as Luna Oi. Big disclaimer, full translation of this series is still in progress. As of this recording, Volume 2 was released relatively recently, but Volume 3, which is on political economy, and Volume 4, which is on scientific socialism, they're both still being worked on. These textbooks are translated and annotated versions of Vietnam's curriculum on Marxism-Leninism. Again, shout out to Luna and her spouse for putting so much time and effort to translate and annotate
We love you,
these
EJ.
books. Because when you read these books, you'll probably be overwhelmed initially by how many annotations there are. There are points where the annotations are like 2 pages long, 1.5 pages long, but that's only because the translators strive to be as comprehensive as they could, since these textbooks were originally written for, students who already had some prior education on these topics. The advantage of that is that these textbooks, well, actually, one advantage that these textbooks have is that they include many more pictures, illustrations, charts, and diagrams. And because they were written in the late 20th century and early 21st century, they have a lot of real-world examples to draw on. They'll probably be the most accessible to a modern reader, even compared to Politzer and Cornforth, who I found to be pretty accessible too. Specific shout out to the appendixes at the end of each volume because they lay out concepts and terms in a handy, concise way. There's this really, really cute 6-part cartoon in Volume 2 that shows like the relationship between productive forces, relations in production, class consciousness, and there are a lot of good pictures there. It's just handy for visual learners. You're not just looking at text and text and text. Yeah, and like I said, really the only cons are that the series is still being translated, so you'll have to wait a little longer to get Volumes 3 and 4. But in the meantime, you could also go support their GoFundMes to actually help them finish these textbooks.
Nice.
And again, link in the show notes. You can download the PDFs from their website or buy the physical copies if you prefer. There are options. That's that for the 3 primers. Now I'm going to just quickly recommend some actual reading lists specifically. So first, there's ML Reading Hub. Their curriculum is here first because it's the longest. It's separated into 4 distinct stages. Stalin, Mao, Lenin, Engels, and Marx are here, of course. But what I really love in, I think, part 4, they include some writings from Ho Chi Minh and even Zhou Enlai. You can read these texts right off of their websites. You can buy the physical compilations, or even read these works off of someone else's website if you prefer how they look on there, Marxist.org or Prolewiki. Speaking of Prolewiki, they have their own beginners list. Link in the show notes. This list mixes 2 primers from the 20th century, Politzer being one of them, along with 2 Lenin texts, an Engels text, and a Marx text. And for Marxist.org, their intro list is a little more rudimentary. It's just focused on Marx and Engels, but you should read Marx and Engels too. So if you want some suggestions for which of those texts to start with, you can check out that list. And again, where you read the books doesn't really matter as much as you actually read them. Some websites do have their own little footnotes and annotations where they add in some historical context. ML Reading Hub does that for some of their texts. But for the most part, just please read them. Please start them and read them.
And it's like, I saw somebody, I forget, one of the big sort of leftist pages saying like, read Marx, it's not that hard. It depends on what Marx you're reading. Like the German ideology is fairly easy. Capital is quite dense and difficult to read. Not because it's like, I mean, it is like sometimes you have to reread passages to like fully internalize and understand them. But it's not that it's like that hard to grasp as like conceptually. It's just that it's so dense with information, so heavy on like I think I described this before as like Marx writes like he's building a mountain out of grains of sand. So he drops one and then another and then another, and they build on top of each other, which makes him very difficult to argue with because you're like, oh no, he already explained that like 3 chapters ago. You can't like bring up this weird red herring. He already mentioned and addressed that concern, but it does make it quite challenging to read. But you should still do it because it is very important to grasp the foundations of this ideology that we all sort of adhere to, I guess.
Right, yeah. And someone made a joke about this last week. They said, Marx will explain something 20 times, but it takes me till the 19th time to actually internalize it.
Yeah.
And specific shout out to Stage 1 of ML Reading Hub's curriculum. They include an excerpt from a Soviet political economy textbook, and they even include their own little pictures in it. That one was a great intro to wages, profit, and some other stuff, even before you get into Marx.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. Really helpful. In the resource guide video I made, I regret not focusing more on the classics, and some folks did call me out on that in the comments, and I was like, I mean, they're not wrong.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you're, even if you read all these lists we recommended, and if you're still hankering for more Marx or Engels or Lenin, you can always check out a list of their works on like Prolewiki's library, or Marxist.org. In the case of Prolewiki, sometimes it's good just to jump into their library and like look at some authors maybe you'd never heard about and read from them.
They should introduce like a randomizer at the front so you could just be like,
they do have a randomizer
on
the first page. Yeah, they'll just recommend like a random book from the library.
That's beautiful.
So basically, check out their Juche section. Big fan of Kim Jong-il. Check out his texts. Giving priority to ideological work is essential for accomplishing socialism. I love that one. Shifting topics slightly, I wanted to recommend a handful of non-classic theoretical texts for the listener. I'm going to list them in order of length, with them getting longer the further I go down. So first, there's Marxism and Eurocentric Diffusion from 1999 by J.M. Blout. This is a relatively short essay. It defends decolonization, dependency theory, and attacks Eurocentric trends in Marxist theory. It ties into the theme of racism and imperialism we discussed in last episode. I don't really have much to say about it because this is one of those essays that speak for themselves. It's pretty short. I think actually one of the biggest things I got from it I didn't expect was just a name of some authors that I saw in it that I didn't know about. It's like, oh, there's this guy. I'll read about him later. I'll write this down. This next, I have A Flight from History, The Communist Movement Between Self-Criticism and Self-Contempt by the great Domenico Losordo. So in this essay, Losordo, basically what he does is that he emphasizes the endless propaganda, economic, and military war against the USSR and the other socialist countries, while also defending them and critiquing them when appropriate. But the main through line of his critique is that of these self-proclaimed communists who are so indoctrinated by the dominant capitalist ideology that they're just eager to denounce decades and decades of socialist revolution in the 20th century. I did want to give a specific shout out to my comrade, N.S. Harkins. They run a YouTube channel where they post audio readings of articles and essays that were posted on the website Red Sails. If you're someone who likes audiobooks, I suggest you give them a listen. Link to their reading of this Lasordo essay will be in the show notes. Next, there is Nationhood or Genocide, The Struggle of the Native People Against Canadian and American Imperialism by two members of the Bolshevik Tendency. They didn't give a name for the authors. This is from 1975. So of all the texts I've mentioned today, this one really has a strong time capsule vibe because the authors really, intentionally or not, convey what the Marxist debates of the mid-1970s were like in North America. The Sino-Soviet split is constantly hanging overhead, with the authors really coming hard against the Soviet Union and firmly on the side of People's China and Albania. Part of the criticism is deserved. There really was a failure in dealing with the national question in the USSR after Stalin's death. And, the authors, they make a good faith criticism of the way people mechanically use Stalin's definition of a nation as a checklist, almost. That's not all there is to this essay, though. It begins as a historical materialist investigation into the history of indigenous tribes in North America, with a specific focus on the Canadian region. You'll notice a recurring theme between this essay and Open Invades of Latin America, which we talked about last episode I was on, is ecocide, native people facing the brunt of poisoned waters and high levels of toxicity in their environments, in addition to alcohol and drug dependency being used as a tool for colonization. That's about it for my summary. Again, essay will be in the show notes. As far as I know, you can only find this one on Marxist.org, so yeah, definitely save the link. And finally, I just wanted to recommend Lavender and Red by Leslie Feinberg, which I do know that Jeremy and Ray read before.
We have both read it, yeah.
Yes.
It's an interesting it's hard to describe it because it's not really one cohesive text. It's like a series of varying
tweets.
Length, varying types of, it's some of it does read like
reads
tweets.
Like tweets, be honest, Andre. It reads like tweets.
And some of it is more like an essay, and some of it is just sort of like
short articles.
Thoughts. Yeah. It's an interesting read. I recommend it highly, but it is unusual in terms of its format.
Yes, especially. Yeah, because like you said, it's a series of articles and essays. It was written over the course of 4 years for the Workers' World's newspaper, and it was published from 2004 to 2008. It covers a lot of history. It puts queer liberation and women's emancipation at the front of its analysis. Even with the length, I just adore the way Feinberg wrote. They were just an amazing author. Really, the biggest caveat I would give is that the PDF of it up on Workers' World is very mid-2000s web design. So the form and it may actually be the most uncomfortable to read just because of that.
Yes. And it's like, if you go to, because you can, well, you could, I don't know if you still can, find a version of their website that's like on the Internet Archive, or it was, again, I don't, a lot of stuff is vanishing from there, so I don't know to what degree it's still there. But it's basically their website, and it is very tedious to navigate, because if you click on a link and go to the article, you can only then go to the previous article or the one next to it down the line, or you have to go back to the original sort of index and choose a new article. There is no index that is attached to the article. I don't know. It's so when I was trying to do research for the Stalin eras, I read a bunch of stuff on homosexuality in socialist countries. And so I was specifically looking for those topics. And so it was okay, read this one, then go back to the very top of the index and then scroll down and go, okay, wait, I've read that one. I've read that one. Yeah, I don't know, whatever. But that's a minor caveat. If you're wanting to read the whole thing, I guess it's not a big deal, because you can just go one to the next, to the next, to the next.
Yeah. And and you can also take the PDF and convert it into an EPUB. I actually did that, and I'm reading it on my phone, and I've been reading it on my phone, and it's way more comfortable than just downloading the PDF.
There's an EPUB version. I have an EPUB version.
Is there?
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Okay. Oh, actually, yeah, they
can send it to y'all if you need.
Yeah, they literally have an EPUB download up on the website.
Look
when I think about it. I don't know why I converted it to an EPUB then. I might have actually messed with the format. Whoops.
Oh, the format's not great in the EPUB that I have, but it does exist.
It's probably somebody did the same thing.
Yeah. No. By the way, I did want to add an extra book recommendation. It's called Love is the Law, Cuba's Queer Rights Revolution, published by the party Struggle for Socialism. The first half of this book includes original essays that explains Cuba's 2022 family code and the process of it coming into being. However, there is a bit of crossover with Lavender and Red because the second half of Love is the Law includes the sections from Lavender and Red about Cuba. So that's why this is an extra recommendation. How you want to approach this book and Lavender and Red is up to the listeners. Just keep them on your list regardless, because it's really helpful. It helps you argue against people who just want to shut down debate by lazily repeating, Fidel Castro was homophobic. Which, actually, I would like to close off this section by reading a brief excerpt from Lavender and Red. This is from the article called 1965 UMAP Brigades, What They Were, What They Were Not. This is Fidel. Concerning women, there was a strong prejudice, as strong as in the case of homosexuals. I'm not going to come up with excuses now, for I assume my share of the responsibility. We inherited male chauvinism and many other bad habits from the conquistadors. I would say that it corresponded to a given stage and is largely associated with that legacy of chauvinism. Today, the people have acquired a general, rounded culture. I'm not going to say there is no male chauvinism, but now it's not anywhere near the way it was back then, when that culture was so strong. With the passage of years and the growth of consciousness about all of this, we have gradually overcome problems and such prejudices have declined. But believe me, it was not easy." End quote. And now Cuba has the most advanced family code on the planet, so it was not just talk. Just me helping to protect my main man Fidel's name, because I'm tired of the way people attack him, specifically on that. He owned up to it.
Yeah. Didn't he sneak into one of the camps just to observe what was going on?
Yes.
And then he was like, oh my God, this is terrible.
Yeah, one guy was going to cut the hammock to harass him, but when he saw that it was Fidel sleeping there, he lost his shit. Yeah.
I mean, also, again, the argument for what is socialism? What are its limitations? What does it do? Is the function of socialism is to create the conditions so that people can overcome these biases. So the expectation that the people who are creating those conditions have already overcome them is ridiculous and eclipses the value of building a socialist state, right? The point is to build the material conditions so that people have enough resources, they have education, they have time and space and infrastructure to build their psychological sort of consciousness so that societies with these backward views can overcome them. So the idea that this person's this, that person's that is that's great man bullshit. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly.
And additionally, Marxism, the emphasis on self-criticism actually helps us talk about the mistakes we did make so that we can move on and do better. Again, that is what Fidel did. So the people who isolate what he thought in the fucking 1960s and 70s are not being intellectually honest.
Okay, so now that we've kind of gone through all of these theory-based texts, I guess, what are your recommendations or what are your sort of concepts for how somebody can retain that information, how somebody can study these sort of details and internalize them?
First off, on the top of the advice section, just so I can get to this before we really dive in further, practice your writing skills, guys. You don't have to become a full-blown historian or author, but learning to write essays, whether it's in response to a news event that you feel is good to comment on, or whether that just be in response to a bourgeois narrative you want to debunk, or even you just want to advocate for a cause that you care about using a Marxist-Leninist worldview. That's really good, especially since it allows you to go back to the texts you've read and cite them in a way to try to introduce them to new people. I've seen many brilliant essays on gender liberation written by trans comrades, and I've seen great essays about the importance of disability rights. Regardless of what you do, writing is a good skill to have. Become the best propagandist you can be, because we need people to agitate and advocate and organize. Right, so digging into studying, well, I actually organized some questions so you guys can hop into what works for each of us. For me, I like to specifically carve out specific times of the day to read. One of my comrades recently recommended I set a focus timer so that I feel motivated to sit down and read for this specific length of time. That's not an option for everyone, but that has been helpful for me. I read a lot using my phone, and some specific apps are PDF Expert, which you have to pay $70 $8 a year to use it, but it is pretty robust. There's the iOS book app on iPhone, which comes with it by default. That one encourages you to buy books, but you can literally just import PDFs into it and use all of the really handy customization features they have. They have different fonts, page colors, and highlighters. I've been using this one a lot recently, and it's helped me a lot with focusing because I've had some problems with focusing. Jeremy or Ray, would one of you like to recommend something that you do that helps you a lot, but you think others may not be aware of?
As a person with ADHD, it's important.
Never met her. No idea what that's like.
Like literally every one of the proles, actually. I have to, if I'm reading for the purpose of like internalizing it for an episode, for instance, I need to like put my phone away. It needs to go somewhere that's not right in front of me and accessible, because otherwise when I'm like, my mind starts to drift, I will pick it up and look at it, and then I'll mess with it, and then I will like have lost the thread, and I'll have to go back and start reading again. And I think really like generally getting distractions altogether out of the way. However, something that has been helpful to me as well is to put on instrumental music. My default is the No Man's Sky soundtrack, because it's neither like too obtrusive in terms of like there's a lot of, it doesn't have a lot of like guitar solos or like really complex it's post rock, so there is some complexity to it, but not in the sense of like in your face sort of music components. But it is also instrumental, and therefore like there's no lyrics that distract you. But it's also not so chill and boring that like you're falling asleep listening to it.
Okay.
And that does help.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I did try to put on white noise sometimes when I've read. It's just made me fall asleep.
Yeah, it makes you tired.
Yeah.
I mean, and there are alternatives. Like I love
the Minecraft sound OST would probably be good for that.
That's probably good too. Yeah. Like, I love Ornette Coleman, but there is no way I could listen to Ornette Coleman because there's all the saxophone stings and like weird sort of like rambling, pieces there. So yeah, I don't know. You'll sort of have to probably trial and error and figure out if that works for you. And if so, what type of music, but yeah.
I come into this as both coach and teacher and person with ADHD. And I think that like if you are trying to build a reading practice that is just for yourself and just for your own niche curiosity, it is not likely to take you very far, and you are going to need to scaffold a lot of different tools to be able to do it. For me, I find that accountability and relevance is extremely important. If I know that, like you said, Jeremy, that I have agreed to read a book because the guest asked me personally and not Jeremy as a proxy to read it, then I will do it by that date and time because I have set the commitment to do that, and I don't want to like let somebody else down or put the guest in a situation where I've not prepared what I said I would. There are also other things in my life, obviously. I mean, hey, whatever. Honestly, I think there are worse reasons to start a podcast than just to have like accountability, right? Like I'm not to critique that. However, there's also like other things that I do in my life that make learning certain information really important. And like that helps me contextualize it. So if you have no context for the things that you do, I mean, this is going to echo our previous episode with Andre as well as our episode with Nathan. But like at the very least, you can either join a book club or find yourself like a reading buddy so that you have a set date and time that you can like discuss things together. And also ideally more than that, if your body permits, if your migration status permits, all of these things, that you would be physically like out of your home and doing work within your community that made that information relevant,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and any good communist org will have you reading texts and discussing them with comrades. I know some of my comrades in PSL, like one of the first texts they were given was A State and Revolution by Lenin, and they had like a set amount of time to read that before their next meeting.
And there might not be one where you live, but if you're doing a trash pickup, I mean, that would motivate me to read some information about the climate, or specifically like in the region where I lived, and kind of doing these things that like help inform the projects that we're doing to ensure that we're doing them in the most efficient way possible. Because of course, like, I know not everybody lives somewhere where there's a chapter, or honestly, maybe there's a great org, but your specific chapter you don't vibe with. Like, we're not here to judge you for that. What am I going to say? But yeah, like finding other motivating factors other than like, I will be better if I read this book. Like, that's very vague, and it can feel daunting, right? So like having someone to do the reading with and having something to read it for, I think is probably really helpful. I read in complete silence. If the people's husband is doing a noise-making activity, I put on these giant headphones. I read everything on a Kindle. I get it wherever I can get it. I put it on my Kindle and I read on my Kindle. And that's just the truth. If you want to hear the sad, pitiful story of my family declaring bankruptcy and having to sell all the books in our house, and from then on, I switched to the e-reader. I know, tragic, woe is me. It did happen. It's a true story. But yeah, I'm an e-reader person. I know it's contentious, but I'm out here reading, so.
Works.
Yeah.
Hey, it works.
That's the important part.
I just remember two specific things that work for me. I use Discord a lot, so I can more easily voice chat with other comrades. And sometimes, like, if they'll tell me, hey, I'm going to start reading this book you recommended, I'll just be like, oh, cool. Could I join you for a chapter or two so we can read it together? That is a great way of reading, like real time, like over the internet, reading a chapter together. There are so many like opportunities for you to include personal anecdote. Yeah, so reading with comrades over the internet, if you can't find an org, that's great too. Also, like, sometimes just if you read digitally, screenshot or like, take a picture of the book that you're highlighting or whatever, and like share it with your comrades and be like, hey, what do you guys think of this? Do you want to discuss it? Would one of you like to read it with me? At the very least, you may even motivate them to read it on their own. And I know this for a fact because I share so many screenshots with my other comrades that I've motivated a good handful of them to read. And yeah, it's like Rae said, having that motivating factor, doing it by yourself, you'll only go so far.
Yeah.
I also think it's a really helpful skill, again, coming in as a teacher. Every page, I mean, if you find that the text is very dense, you might want to be doing this like every page or every paragraph. But if it's something that's a little bit more easy for you to read, every chapter or whatever, to stop and ask yourself, like, can I put this in my own words? What was the main idea of this? And maybe this sounds really cheeseballs, but like when I run, so outside of Proles, right? Like when I run courses on stuff like this, like I have little KWL charts. If anybody doesn't know what those are, you can find templates online. They're like the way that we teach kids to read when we're in school. K is know, W is want to know, L is learn. And so when you go into the chapter, when you go into the book, you fill out the K, what you already know about the subject, W, what you would like to learn in the process of reading this, and then you go back after you finished it and you fill out the L. Or you can find like little templates online. I'm talking about like middle school reading activities. That's like, what is the main idea? What are the supporting ideas? How do I feel about this? Maybe this seems really silly for people, really elementary. For what it's worth, like I still do this. I still do this. I assign this to other people. I do this in groups of like whole ass adults, some of whom even have, advanced degrees, or some of whom have been studying this for a very long time. Maybe it sounds very simple, but it's really hard for me to reconcile the contradiction, as we were discussing earlier, of people saying this isn't accessible to me, and also we're not normalizing the reading tools that would help make these maybe denser or more like foreign, and I mean that literally through space, but also of course through time and concept, more available and more accessible to us. These things like exist for free on the internet. They don't have to be communist specific. Again, you can just look up like middle school and high school, like secondary school reading materials, and like you said, Andre, you should write about things, even if you're not going to publish it, writing a paragraph about like, what did I learn in this chapter? What are the questions that I still have in this chapter? And being in that practice, reading and writing also have a dialectical relationship that sort of help each other. And every time you read something, as long as you're doing it intentionally, it can make you a better writer. And every time you're writing something, it can make you a more intentional reader. And so, yeah, it maybe seems really effortful in the beginning. But again, if you're just staring at a book and reading the same page 300 times, I'm sorry to to tell you that's effortful and it's getting you fucking nowhere.
Yeah.
So you can put in the effort and build these skills for yourself so that you can understand it better, and then you'll feel more confident. And I think that like, to talk about getting into a reading group, I understand if you feel like I'm reading these concepts, I don't really understand, I'm scared I'm going to go to this reading group and everybody's going to know more than me. Starting these practices with yourself can give you the confidence to then go into the group and say, okay, I might not be right because that's not the point, but I have formed an opinion about this. I've read it to the best of my ability. And at the very least, I can engage in conversation and feel confident that I have like thought through these ideas.
Yeah. And like you said, you don't have to share it with everyone. You don't have to like make a Substack or like a Medium page and like put out essays.
Just
like
a little
once every
page in
week.
your notebook of like, what did I learn from this chapter? Or what did I learn from this essay? And what are the questions that I still have? And just being in the practice of saying that helps you, and also helps you retain the information.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, if you are trying to be a better writer and you, for instance, know somebody who you're like, I like the way this person writes, maybe show them what you're writing and say, hey, do you have any sort of feedback on how I could improve what I'm doing here? Like that will, because you will improve writing if you keep writing without feedback. But if you get some feedback from people that you trust and people that you feel like you're like, man, I wish I wrote like so-and-so, or I think so-and-so is very like good at expressing, whatever, or condensing, synthesizing ideas, ask that person, hey, can you just give me like a little bit of feedback on this piece of writing and what you think about it? Knowledge, as Andre said in the first episode, is socially determined and socially developed, but so are skills in that way.
Right.
Like you if you're operating in isolation, it's hard for you to know, am I getting better? Am I doing something that's working? Is this something that other people would want to read? I don't know. You don't know that until somebody else looks at it.
And similarly, obviously, writing is a more productive skill than reading is, but reading similarly, right? Maybe you don't like our theory episodes and that's totally fine. But if you do, the way that I determine what I'm going to put in those episodes is exactly the things that I've said. As I read something and I'm like, can I put this in my own words? Do I know what this person is saying? And if I don't, then I have people to ask. Sometimes, often it is like an actual conversation with a friend, with a comrade that I trust and respect, who's knowledgeable about the area. Or also, obviously, like there's other resources, like other people have written essays, especially when we're doing a theory text that's 100 years old, right? Like I can be like, oh, did somebody else write something about this? Do I agree with that? Yes or no? Does that challenge what I know? Is that in line with what I know? And so you can learn also to read the way that other people read by the same thing, just asking people, how do you do this? What's the process? Do you have a process for this?
And there is a reason that both Red Sails and Prolewiki have original essays written for those websites. And you should absolutely collaborate with others because, as Krupskaya said, a communist is a social person. I know for some of us that maybe, oh God, I have to talk to people, but please build these skills. The revolution will not be done just by individual people sitting at home looking at their phones. I greatly appreciate Rae mentioning that chart. Do you guys have any specific tools or apps you just wanted to mention off the top of your heads?
Like I said, I mostly read on Kindle. If I find that that's challenging for me, as notoriously I have said before, I struggle to read like just pure history texts rather than something that's theoretical. So like a lot of the books that we read for Stalin eras, I printed those out so that I could like highlight and make more notes and ask more questions and be a little bit more interactive. But when it's a text that it's a little bit more easy for me to understand, I'm comfortable to just read it on my Kindle and then either write in my journal, or I guess sometimes I use like the Notes app in my phone, just because I can put it on one device and it'll show up on the other device if I'm like going back and forth and reading things in a different place. But I'm old and I don't really know about technology.
I really don't use a lot of apps. Like if there's a text that is quite lengthy and I don't need to like have notes on it for the sake of like citing it later, I will listen to the audiobook version if I can find it. And if there isn't one,
oh yeah, I love audiobooks.
There is a quite terrible but useful AI text reader thing that I have that will translate PDFs or whatever into vocalized speech. It very strangely includes breaths and mouth noises for these like digital voices, which I hate. I'm like, why are you? Like we spend hours and hours and hours cutting our own breaths and mouth noises out of our podcast, and for some reason the stupid AI program is putting them back in. But I will do that. But that's only if it's something that I don't need to like cite later.
Correct.
It's more just
like
for my own sort of enjoyment
like if I'm reading
knowledge.
a background book in order to inform, for example, a theory text that I would be writing more extensively on, that background book, that would be great. And that's true. I think audio is an incredible resource, and especially...
But it's easier for your mind to wander, though.
It's true. That's what I was going to say. It's also a useful tool for neurodivergent people, but also for anyone to have the audio and read along at the same time. Again, maybe that sounds like what you did as a kid, but by the way, a lot of fucking people read more when they were 9 than they read as adults. So like, it's not terrible to bring those tools. And again, I also try to read in like Spanish, for example. And like in that case, I often get the audiobook and the text so that it is being reinforced, because I like learned Spanish mostly through listening, and therefore I don't read as effectively, especially obviously on like a dense or difficult topic or on something that was written quite a long time ago, which can be, by the way, a habit stacking. Not that we all need to life hack ourselves for efficiency, but I'm always banging on about, learning a language and the value of learning a language is like, well, getting to read theory texts in the language that they were written, or getting to have conversations with different comrades, or having the opportunity to read both translations. I know some multilingual people who do this to see what you can get out of different people's interpretations of the original text. I mean, hey, there's benefits to it for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I use audiobooks a fair amount too. Like for example, in the last episode I was on, one of the books I talked about was A.B. Abrams's book, Power and Primacy. That one I originally experienced as an audiobook while I was at work. And after I finished with the audiobook, I actually read the book itself, and because I was somewhat familiar with it, I was able to go through faster, and I was able to highlight and like screenshot parts that I remember like really evoking a lot of emotions in me when I was listening to it. One thing I like to do, actually, it might sound a little weird, but I'll put on an audiobook while I'm playing video games, and I'll be like, okay, I'll play for this amount of time, and when I'm done, I'll actually sit down and read. And just having the audiobook in the background gets me more into a focusing, like intellectual mood, and that does actually help me focus. Just like laying the groundwork for later actually reading. Because if I'm gonna like put on like a podcast or something, chances are I'll probably choose something like sillier and funnier, and that'll have me laughing. It won't really have me in a mood to read.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. So I just did want to shortly go through some specific websites to get books. So there's Anna's Archive, a shadow library. I will not ask the hosts to link this in the show notes because it's a bit more dubious because of like copyright and stuff. But this is where I get a lot of my digital copies.
Allegedly,
it's decently intuitive. You just have to note whether the file you're downloading is a PDF or an EPUB. If you're using the slow downloads, which is the only free option, you will have to wait a couple minutes. Just keep the page open and don't let it linger for too long after the countdown ends, because otherwise you'll have to wait for it to refresh and do it all over again. Internet Archive is pretty well known. You can find a lot of really important texts hosted on here. It's also...
That is where the Barbu's Stalin book is, if anybody's interested in that, which is a fantastic read.
Yeah, and I specifically thinking of Albert Szymanski's book, Class Struggle in Socialist Poland, which is completely out of print, and you can't find anywhere except for Internet Archive. For some reason, this book is like 200 megabytes big on the website.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but...
Yeah, I mean, that's like, it's the same with Barbu's. Like, and any physical copies you can find are quite pricey. Like we bought a copy for the Stalin eras, and then we gave that away to one of our Vanguard patrons during a drawing. And so Justin bought another copy, and I think they were both like $50-$60 a piece. Like they're not cheap.
Yep. Build your digital libraries, people. Like keep these texts just around to save them and like duplicate them to share with others. There's Iskra Books. I mentioned this in the video I made as a place to get classic Marxist texts, and they do have reprints of like Stalin's collected works, which I love because the covers are gorgeous. But they also sell original translations, like Lasordo's book on Stalin, and they also have their own original stuff. Best part about Iskra, every single digital copy on the website is free. You can just go to its page, download it right away, save the PDF, duplicate it, give it to friends. Obviously, you'll have to pay some money if you want to get the physical copies because there's shipping costs. But
Sure.
yeah, great resource. Tons of free books if you just want it digitally. And I'll just quickly mention Thrift Books. This place is really, really cool if you want to get relatively cheap books delivered to you. It's a pretty intuitive website. I'll just leave it at that. This episode was not sponsored by Thrift Books. It was sponsored by our friend Francis Fukuyama, of course.
Right.
Right.
Great
and
man.
might seem a bit of a weird question, and I think we did kind of talk about this when we encouraged people to collaborate when studying, but do you guys have any advice or recommendations of what not to do when trying to learn? For me, I just wrote down uh, getting hard on yourself for not understanding something. Cut that out. That is not helpful. Don't be mean to yourself. It's fine. Learning can be a difficult process, but just keep moving forward and trying to understand what you can. That has helped me a ton. I always get self-conscious about like, oh, all my other comrades know so much more than me. I'm like, I'll never know as much as them. I'll never read as much as them. Just get started and
Everyone
keep
feels
moving
this
forward.
way. Everyone feels this way. Everyone feels this way.
Yep.
And the thing about this is like there's a degree, emotionally, there's a degree of humility that we should all have. And also, hot take, I think that the belief that like I have not done enough, I do not know enough is neoliberalism taking root in our personalities and like manifesting in our organizing spaces. The idea that you as an individual have to be everything, know everything, think of everything by yourself, again, is more great man bullshit. When we think about, for example, somebody like Lenin, we're not seeing the input of his wife in real time, the input of his closest friends, the people that he was having conversations with all the time, because we're not publishing those things. We're just reading the final work. And that's not to suggest that Lenin, for example, wasn't a great man, because of course he was. But the idea that everybody has to know everything, everybody has to have had every thought in order to say anything at all. Again, there's a degree of humility that you have to say, yeah, I don't really know about that, or that's something that I can learn more. And that's important and that can motivate you. But the shame that accompanies like, I don't know enough, I didn't do enough, that's liberal bullshit. That's worshiping the cult of the individual, and we all need to get over it because there's not enough of us having these conversations, period. So start now, be imperfect, learn as you go, apologize for the things that you didn't know, but like, you can't wait. I'm sorry, you can't wait.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jeremy, can you think of anything that you would recommend not doing when trying to learn? Just
I think you can read and study in isolation, but I don't recommend it. It's much more helpful to have comrades check you, I suppose, as you go, like to make sure that, first of all, you're staying on task, like Rae mentioned before, like having accountability, or Andre, I think you said it as well, like having somebody else to make sure that you have some reason to keep going when you feel discouraged is vital. And I think also you may have a particular interpretation of the text that somebody else does not share.
Right.
And you can have a conversation with someone else about that and come up with, oh, well, I didn't even think about that, and synthesize some kind of idea between the two of you. Or, maybe you're completely wrong, or maybe they're completely wrong. But without having that conversation, it's very difficult to know whether you are on the right track.
And having an interaction, by the way, where you're completely wrong is also helpful, because then you can look at that original source text and be like, what about the wording of that did not connect with this reader, right? Who was presumably in this context reading in good faith. And like, therefore, how can we sharpen our understanding and our messaging to ensure that this doesn't happen again?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
I did want to hold on. Cut this out, Jeremy. 1 second. I'm trying to find my words here. Yeah. Last thing about reading, try to make it as pleasurable as possible. I love reading, and sometimes I do have trouble actually focusing and sitting down and reading. I think especially recently that I've had like hours cut at work, I've been kind of going stir crazy, and like reading has kind of become a chore. But try to balance texts that you're interested with texts that you struggle with. For example, I struggle a lot with political economy, the law of value, wages, labor, profit, and I've been balancing that with Stasi State and Socialist Paradise, which is about the GDR, a topic that I love to read about. I love reading about the GDR, and so like earlier in the day, maybe I'll do like Marx's Wage, Labor, and Capital. I think that's what it was called. And then later in the day, I'll reward myself by reading some Stasi State and Socialist Paradise. Um, Actually, do try to balance maybe a book that is more historically focused with a book that is a little more theoretically focused, which may, which is actually almost a bit of a false dichotomy, because some of the best theory is also history. When you're reading Stalin, like he'll talk about all of this history, and then he'll talk about theory. And of course, historical materialism is dialectical materialism applied to history and the analysis of the movement of society. I guess what I'm trying to say is try to be an expansive reader if you can. You'll struggle with a lot of books. There's some books that I've read that I learned a lot that I probably don't want to go back to. And there's some books that I'm just really comfortable and like to revisit a lot. Like I love revisiting Albert Shamansky's works. I love Human Rights in the Soviet Union. I'll reread the preface sometimes just out of fun because I love the way it makes me feel. And yeah, just
Am I allowed to push back? I think I'm going to push back on this.
Oh,
I
sure,
guess it
sure.
depends on where you are in your
Yeah,
development journey.
Yeah.
But like, if you are a beginner and you're already struggling with this,
Mhm.
like I often say that I'm like, just like, I stand like, you don't need to know everything. Read the things that you're interested. I was a communist. Okay. Here goes. I can't believe I'm saying this in front of the paywall. I was a communist for a long time and was like, I'm really not sure about this Trotsky Stalin thing. And I don't really know how to figure it out. And so I spent a long time, and kind of also Sino-Soviet split was like one for me like several years ago, where I was like, I am a communist, but I feel like I don't know enough to even start to know enough to make a decision about this. And really, I'm just going to leave it alone and I'm going to ignore it. And it's going to find me at the right time. But I cannot allow my limitations of knowledge and understanding in this area to slow my progress, like my curiosity, right? So like I do think if you're very, very, very beginner and you want to read something that's very new, rather than reading something that's 100 years old. I know that there's a lot of criticism about this, but I kind of also understand it. I think if you're part of labor struggle in your region, reading books about, like in my case, like Appalachian labor struggle or something, like I think that that's a great place to start. Again, I personally, and again, I'm, you can disagree with me, but none of us need to know everything. And especially if you're just starting out, I think it's totally valid to read the things that you're interested in. But again, just my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a weirdo. And so the first thing I
What? I had no idea.
It's true. The first thing that I read obviously was the Communist Manifesto, because I was like, okay, well, what is this about? And then the second thing that I read was Marx's Capital, which is like a psychotic thing to do. Like it's a bizarre decision to make, but I was like, well, I need to understand the foundations before I start reading anything else. And it was very hard to get through. And it took me a long, long time to read through Capital. I don't know if I would recommend that trajectory to anyone, unless you just have that much like sort of drive to be like, I'm going to get through this no matter what. But, I quite often will recommend Black Shirts and Reds by Michael Parenti is like the first thing for a baby leftist to read, because it is so easy to read and it's short and it's full of pointed historical pieces of information and, analysis and understanding that you would not otherwise get if you were reading sort of liberal sources. And I think it's a great place to start if you're like, and it also sort of like demystifies the fascist, communist sort of, the false equivalents that liberals do. And I think that's important. So I don't know, I don't even really know what I'm trying to say. I don't recommend doing what I did unless you are just a weird person who is just going to push through the pain barrier to get to the end of Marx's Capital as the first thing you ever read.
Yeah. And that's why we're here. That's why we have this episode and last episode to offer folks some starting places that we think are accessible. And there's the 3 primer texts we talked about earlier in the episode. And Black Shirts and Reds. That's one of the book I also mentioned in the video that I made, because it's the first book I read. It really in terms of all this tradition, because it helped deprogram me from a lot of the historical narratives that bourgeois society taught me in the United States. Yeah, because like Jeremy said, a lot of people do start with the manifesto, and a lot of people will just jump headfirst into Capital and just be completely lost. And it's funny because of all the reading lists I've looked at, and I've seen comrades talk about, oh, what's the best starting place to begin with? Most people don't mention the manifesto. They usually go with Principles of Communism. And I know PSL, one of their first books is State and Revolution from Lenin. And a lot of people are screaming at you, and it's why on earth are you reading What Is to Be Done? That is not a very beginner-friendly Lenin text. There is so much historical context around it.
But it is a very good text.
It is.
For converting anarchists to tankies.
It is. Of course, there's also On Authority, which is 2 pages long from Engels.
Yeah. Attaching decisive importance to the ideological factor is a law of revolutionary movement. Material factors, too, play a great part in the revolutionary movement, but the existence of material conditions does not give rise to the revolution automatically. How to make use of these material conditions depends on people's conscious activity. Whether these material conditions are prepared quickly or not depends on man's activity. The revolution can be pushed forward only by the active struggle of the revolutionaries and the popular masses. Fundamentally speaking, a revolution does not always break out when all necessary conditions exist, nor is it carried out always in favorable circumstances. Waiting with folded arms for all conditions to ripen is tantamount to refusing to make a revolution. Kim Jong-il on the Juche idea.
Settle your quarrels. Come together. Understand the reality of our situation. Understand that fascism is already here. That people are dying who could be saved. That generations more will die or live poor, butchered, half-lives if you fail to act. Do what must be done. Discover your humanity and your love in revolution. Pass on the torch. Join us. Give up your life for the people. George Jackson, quoted in the preface to his book, Blood in My Eye.
That about does it for this episode. Thank you so much to Andre and to all of our listeners and Patreon subscribers. The newest ones are Booper McGeezax, Voroshilov's Horse, Joshua V.B., David D., Abdullah, Radical Education, Scott, and Monty Oblivion. And a very special shout out to our Vanguard patrons, Class Antagonism, Audigem, The Leninist Lawyer, B, Lil Lumpenprol, The Winking Cossack, Better Red Than Liberal, and Alex D. Once again, if you'd like to subscribe, you can do so at patreon.com/prolspod for free. If you have any questions, comments, or episode ideas, please email us at prolspod@outlook.com. Please follow, review, like, all that algorithm stuff, and we will see you in 2 weeks. May the specter haunt your streets, and solidarity forever.
Death to America, read a fucking book.
And now, a clip from today's bonus episode, only available at patreon.com/prolspod. Thanks for supporting the show.
Well, and then there's the one that's about, what's her name?
Guru Jagat.
Yes, Guru
I was
Jagat,
in her
who, like,
online
learned from
cult
Yogi
for a
Bhajan.
while. I was in her online cult
No
for.
shit.
Oh, yeah, listen, the tea is
Oh,
piping
wow.
hot. I feel like our audience is probably not that interested in it, but listen,
Oh,
the tea.
I bet
we had
people
a
would be.
stand. We had a videoed standoff. Like,
No shit.
Wow.
Do you have it recorded?
no, I'm sure
Sad.
she does, but I doubt. Well, may she rest in peace, Katie Griggs. Somebody in there has it because it was like a group class.
Okay. I think we should do this episode. I think it would be dope.
I have
That's
so
fascinating.
Because
much.
I'm a messy bitch who
I have
loves
so
drama,
much yoga tea, and then actually, like, then I was a life coach, and like, I mean, I guess I still am, but not like a girl boss coaching coach. And like, I have all the coaching tea. Like, I have my proximity to cult spaces is like, you all cannot even fathom how much cult
It's like
tea.
the Venn diagrams of circle.
It's like me cults.